In the heart of a lush green village framed by rolling hills and mango orchards, there lived a boy named Arjun. He was the kind of child teachers adored in the early years: sharp eyes, quick answers, and an innocent charm that made adults nod approvingly. "He's gifted," they'd say. "This boy will go far." But as Arjun grew older, so did his distractions. What once was a bright spark of potential began to flicker behind the blue light of mobile games, endless chatting with friends, and long afternoons wasted watching vines and videos instead of studying. His books, once colored with notes and energy, gathered dust beneath his bed. Every day, he'd promise himself he'd start tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. "Arjun, time is slipping away," his father warned as he scrolled through his phone. "You're not a child anymore," his mother added gently, folding his school uniform. But Arjun didn't listen. In his mind, there was always time. Until the exam results came. The day the report cards were handed out, the school buzzed with energy. Some students laughed in relief, others sighed in frustration. Arjun stood silently, eyes glued to the red ink that circled his marks, below average in every subject. His friends slowly distanced themselves. Teachers stopped smiling when they saw him. Even his little brother, who once looked up to him, seemed puzzled now. At home, the silence was louder than shouting. His father's eyes were heavy, not with anger, but disappointment. His mother placed a plate of food before him without a word. Arjun pushed it away. He went to bed early that night, not because he was tired, but because he didn't know how to face them. His thoughts spun like a wheel stuck in the mud. What happened to me? I used to be good at this. The next day, instead of going straight to school, Arjun took a different path. His feet, almost by instinct, led him to the edge of the village, to the old wooden bench under the neem tree where his grandfather always sat in the mornings, sipping chai and feeding the birds. Grandpa looked up as Arjun approached. "Well," he said with a warm smile, "the birds didn't expect you, but I did." Arjun sat down beside him, the wooden bench creaking under the weight of silence. "I failed, Dadaji," Arjun finally whispered. "Not just the exams. Everything." Grandpa nodded, his eyes twinkling with something deeper than judgment, recognition. "I see," he said gently. "Then it's time I told you a story." Arjun blinked. "A story?" "One that might change how you see the ticking of the clock forever." The birds chirped around them as if they too were waiting. Grandpa leaned back, his voice dropping into that rhythm Arjun had known since he was little, the kind of voice that made you lean in, that made the air still. "Long ago," Grandpa began, "in a kingdom much grander than this village, there lived a king named Vikram. He was brilliant, sharp like you, and the entire kingdom believed he would grow into a wise and noble ruler." Arjun sat quietly, eyes fixed on the sway of his grandfather's words. But when Vikram took the throne at a young age, something strange happened. With power came distractions. The king began to spend his days feasting, playing games of strategy, watching dancers, and hosting festivals. Each time his ministers approached him with urgent matters of the state, he waved them off. "I will do it tomorrow," he'd say. "There is time." And there was. For a while. The kingdom didn't crumble overnight. But slowly, crops failed. Villages suffered. Roads cracked and went unrepaired. The people began to lose hope, not all at once, but like sand slipping through fingers. Arjun frowned. Didn't anyone warn him? "Oh yes," Grandpa nodded. "A sage, an old wanderer dressed in robes stained by dust, came to the palace gates one day. He told the guards he had no gifts, no prophecy, only a message." Arjun leaned forward, his eyes catching a spark. "And what did he say?" Grandpa smiled. "He said, 'Time is a chariot, Your Majesty. It moves whether you climb aboard or not. And it will run you over if you lie idle in its path.'" Arjun stared at the dirt near his feet, silent. King Vikram laughed. Grandpa continued. He said, "I am young. I have soldiers and walls. Why should I fear time?" But years passed. And the sage's words returned, not as whispers, but echoes that haunted him. When he looked into the mirror, he saw the lines on his face. The color in his beard had faded. The children of his kingdom had grown up not knowing his name. His ministers had left. His treasury was nearly empty. The people no longer believed. Grandpa's voice softened. And in his final days, when his body was weak and his eyes dim, King Vikram whispered, "Take everything I have, and give me back my time." But no one could. The birds were silent now. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Do you know what the sage said in his last letter?" Grandpa asked. Arjun shook his head. He wrote, "You built palaces on sand. You lit torches while ignoring the sunrise. You chose noise over silence, pride over presence. And time waited for no one." The words wrapped around Arjun like vines, soft, but unshakable. "Dadaji," he whispered. "Am I too late?" Grandpa turned to him, eyes gentle. "Time is like the river you swim in. It doesn't stop, but it lets you change direction. As long as you are alive, you are not too late." Arjun's throat tightened. "I want to change. I don't want to be like that king." "Then don't wait. Begin today." "How?" Arjun asked. Grandpa reached into his satchel and pulled out a small piece of paper. On it, written in ink, were 5 simple words: "Your minutes are your masters." He pressed it into Arjun's palm. "Take control," he said. "Make every minute count. And build something time cannot take from you." That night, Arjun lay awake in bed, staring at the slip of paper his grandfather had given him. "Your minutes are your masters." The words echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat growing louder. He looked around his room, the scattered textbooks, the blinking notifications on his phone, the dusty clock ticking on the wall. All silent witnesses to the time he had lost. The next morning, before the sun crested the hilltops, Arjun was already up. He started small. He cleaned his desk. He stacked his books in order. He took a blank notebook and wrote in bold letters on the first page, "Time used well is life used well." Then he made a plan, not perfect, not overly ambitious. Just honest. 6 a.m. wake up. 6:30 a.m. exercise. 7 a.m. review yesterday's lessons. 8 a.m. breakfast. 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. study course subjects. 1 p.m. break and lunch. 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. practice problems. 5 p.m. playtime. 7 p.m. family time. 8 p.m. light reading. 9:30 p.m. sleep. It was the first schedule he'd ever created for himself. It wasn't just about school, it was about living differently. The first few days were hard. Really hard. He'd slip sometimes, snoozing his alarm, zoning out during math practice, or scrolling through his phone longer than intended. But each time, he'd catch himself, remember the king and grandpa's story, and whisper, "I don't want to be Vikram." What surprised him most wasn't how much he got done, it was how good it felt to be in control. To choose his minutes instead of letting them choose him. After a week, his parents began to notice. One morning, his mother stood in the doorway, watching as he reviewed a chapter before breakfast. Her eyes welled with quiet pride. His father, ever the realist, tried to hide his approval, but at dinner, he placed a hand on Arjun's shoulder and simply said, "Well done." That meant more than any grade. At school, Arjun kept his head down and his focus sharp. His friends joked that he had been possessed by a study ghost, but deep down, some of them began following his example. Arjun wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. He was chasing something far more valuable, clarity. His days began to fill, not with noise, but with purpose. He set goals. Measured progress. Read books not because he had to, but because he wanted to know more. He asked questions in class. Stayed after to help a younger student struggling with science. And all the while, he kept that tiny piece of paper folded inside his notebook. When tiredness crept in, when old habits called him back, he'd take it out, read it again. Your minutes are your masters. Every time he read it, he made a choice to stay the course. Months passed like pages turning in a well-written book, quietly, but with purpose. When exam season returned, the village school was buzzing with nervous energy. Students clutched notes, whispered formulas, and compared last-minute facts. But Arjun was calm. He sat beneath the same neem tree where his grandfather once told him that life was made in moments, not miracles. He closed his notebook, breathed deeply, and whispered to himself, "I've done my part. Let time do the rest." The exams came and went. Paper after paper. He wrote with focus, not fear. No shortcuts. No guesses. Just effort layered with intention. 2 weeks later, the results were posted. The school courtyard filled with voices, some shrill with excitement, others tinged with disappointment. Arjun stood at the back of the crowd, not wanting to expect too much. But a friend elbowed him and grinned. "You should look. You're at the top." Arjun blinked. "What?" "You ranked first." He rushed forward, eyes scanning the list taped to the board. There it was. 1. Arjun Sharma, 95.3%. It felt surreal, like the world had paused for a moment just to let that truth settle in. Whispers rippled across the courtyard. That can't be the same Arjun. The one who used to fail math? He must have changed everything. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because the real victory wasn't the rank. It was what it represented. The next week, the school principal invited him to speak at the morning assembly. Arjun almost declined out of habit, but then remembered the boy he used to be, and all the others like him, still stuck. He stood on the stage, microphone in hand, voice steady. "I used to think time was something I had a lot of," he began. "So I wasted it. I let it pass without noticing. But then I learned, time doesn't wait. It doesn't stop for anyone." The students listened, some wide-eyed, some nodding slowly. "I failed once, not because I wasn't smart, but because I didn't respect time. I let my days control me. I thought tomorrow would always be there. But tomorrow is just a promise. And promises break." He paused, then held up a small, folded slip of paper. "This saved me. It says, 'Your minutes are your masters.' I read it every day. And now, I choose my minutes." When he stepped down, a group of younger students rushed to him, not for praise, but for advice. They asked how to make schedules, how to study better, how to begin again. Arjun sat with them under the tree, just as his grandfather had sat with him, and began to share what he'd learned. It wasn't the beginning of success. It was the beginning of legacy. Years rolled on. Arjun's name became more than just a name in a village school, it became a story. A quiet legend that teachers told struggling students, about the boy who once wasted his days playing games, who failed, who almost gave up, but didn't. Arjun finished school with honors. Then college. Then business school in the city. But he never let go of the lessons he'd learned, not the academic ones, but the human ones. The ones written not in textbooks, but in time. He carried that old, creased slip of paper with him through every stage of his life. It stayed folded inside his wallet like a compass. Your minutes are your masters. After graduation, Arjun started a small logistics company, not flashy, but efficient, precise, dependable. He ran it with the same values that had transformed his life: discipline, consistency, and conscious use of every hour. The business grew. Slowly, then all at once. Soon, he had teams across 3 cities. But even then, Arjun woke at 5 a.m. every morning, planned his day, walked 10 minutes in silence, and remembered his grandfather's story about the foolish king and the wise sage. Success never distracted him from purpose. One winter morning, Arjun was invited to speak at a national youth conference. He stood before a hall packed with college students, influencers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers. Cameras pointed at him, but his eyes searched for one face in the crowd, someone who was just like he once was, lost, drifting, afraid they'd already missed their chance. "I'm not here because I'm special," Arjun began. "I'm here because I was lucky enough to fail early." The hall went still. "I once thought time was free. That I could waste it, toss it aside, and pick it back up whenever I wanted. But I was wrong. Time is the only wealth we cannot earn. And yet, we spend it like it means nothing." He reached into his pocket and held up that same piece of paper. "This saved my life. 5 words. Your minutes are your masters. I read it when I was failing. I read it when I was learning. I read it even now, before I walked on this stage." He paused, letting the silence land. "I'm not here to motivate you with cliches. I'm here to remind you, you don't have forever. But you do have now. And that's more powerful than you think." When he stepped down, the applause was thunderous. But the moment that stayed with him wasn't the standing ovation, it was when a nervous teenage boy walked up afterward, holding a crumpled notebook and asking, "Can you help me make a schedule?" Arjun smiled. "Of course," he said. "Let's begin." Back in his village, the old neem tree still stood. The bench beneath it had grown older, worn smooth by time. And one evening, Arjun returned there, now a grown man in his 30s, to sit quietly with his grandfather once again. The breeze was soft. The sunset golden. "You were right, Dadaji," Arjun said, voice thick with gratitude. Grandpa chuckled. "I just told a story. You chose to live it." They sat in silence. No phones. No noise. Just presence. And as the sky dimmed, Arjun whispered the words that had carried him through every chapter of life. "Time didn't wait for me. But I finally caught up."